Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you usually get your property related questions answered by a team of experts. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. We've all experienced over this last year the new waves of legislation that were threatened to be brought in, which threatened to disrupt the market in some ways. Hopefully they were going to improve the market, but I don't think it's worked out quite that way. Some of these new ideas have been shelved, postponed or put back. So I'm going to ask the same question of both our panellists, who are Ian Humphries, CEO of Brickflow, the digital marketplace for commercial real estate finance, and Jermyn, CEO, Solicitor at Woodstock Legal Services, residential landlord and tenant law specialist. Welcome to you both. Please feel free to just sort of debate this rather than asking a single question, but I'll ask the formal question of you both. To what extent do the panel think government intervention in the legalities of property and its financing is appropriate? I think a lot of people would say today not appropriate at all, but let's hear it from both sides. First of all, Carly, perhaps from you, from a legal point of view, I just wonder how it's affected your your business and your clients.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have to deal with the law as it is today. And we fully understand that, there's a process that these reforms and the legislation needs to go through. And we understand that process takes a long time. But this is taking a very long time. And that's caused a lot of upset and it's causing landlords to exit. The stats show that there's many more Section 21 notices being served. We don't advocate it as a company. I've seen others that have to say, use it now, use it or lose it. So that's, had the the reverse effect of what they're actually trying to do, and it's caused serious issues in the market. There's supply issues. You've got, quite often we're hearing from lettings agents, because we assist them with their referencing process and onboarding of tenants, that they've got huge amounts of tenants all queuing up for the same property, which is just shows there's a supply and demand issue. So it's the uncertainty. What I would always encourage landlords to do is that we've been driving this professionalism of the sector for a long time anyway, and whatever the detail of the reforms, whenever they happen, that's not going to change. And I actually think that's quite right. It does need to be regulated because you need a safe and functioning housing system, private rental sector. And I'm a lawyer, I'm okay with the rules. But people need to know what those rules are, and they need to know whether that's a game they want to play essentially, or whether it's it's not for them and they want to take their investment elsewhere, and whether actually investing in the private rental sector is not for them. So we absolutely need certainty, and I think the lack of certainty is incredibly frustrating for everybody.
I mean, one of the concerns I have is that I'm with you. I think rules and regs are great as long as they're appropriate and
well thought out, well drafted,
well thought out, and considerate too. And I see, when I watch the TV programs that report on such matters, a lot of bad landlords get sort of caught out and brought to the front for publicity. Unfortunately, quite a percentage of those landlords are actually some of the local authority housing or the housing associations.
There's more problems there, I think, than there is in the private rental sector.
In the private sector.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because the incentive for a private sector landlord is to say, well, look, if I provide a good product, chances are I might get a very good tenant taking it up. That incentive is not there in the social housing sector, is it? It's just a function. It's a faceless function. It runs by regulations, but there doesn't seem to be any sympathy, any empathy with the tenants. It just seems very, very difficult. So I understand that, but I also understand that the private rental sector has provided so much help for the government in providing housing, much needed housing, and everything the government seems to be doing at the moment seems to be almost against that. I think my question to you, colleagues, we talked about good legislation and being thought through. Do you think the people that are formulating these new regulations are qualified or capable of doing so properly.
You should be qualified and capable of doing so, but it's
incredible.
It's very complex, and when you're drafting anything, you have to think about every eventuality, and that's almost impossible to do. And there will always be grey areas. It keeps it fun for us lawyers. Not so great if you're a client, but whatever legislation we have, we will end up having satellite litigation around it. It always happens.
Yep.
That's how our legal system works. You then have case law where you interpret that legislation. That's going to be no different with these reforms as and when they come in. So whatever format we have them in, there will certainly be more law that follows. So, but we need to move towards at least some certainty now so that, people can make an educated choice about how they operate in the sector.
If these new regulations come in, do you think there'll be some sort of probationary period for them? Or
quite often they'll do transitionary periods.
Okay.
So, for example, moving into a statutory periodic tenancy, a periodic tenancy, what they're going to move away from is the fixed term tenancies, and they're proposing that everybody's on the periodic tenancies. We've just had huge changes across the border in Wales. So we've had to deal with all of the transition from short hold tenancies to what they call occupation contracts. And they had a transition period to convert those contracts. I don't think they quite got it right, and it was incredibly complex. There was a lot of uncertainty about how that should actually be done. And when you looked at the process, the information that was given to tenants was completely undigestible. I don't think any of them would have read it, would have understood that process and the information they were getting. So I really hope the government will learn from what happened across the border and really simplify it and make it as easy as possible, and to give people healthy and comfortable transition periods to get their heads around the new legislation.
The conversion to new tenancies, do you just want to quickly explain the difference between the periodic tenancy and...
Yeah, so currently you have a system where you have a fixed term tenancy. More often than not, they're 6 months to a year, some are 2 years. And when that fixed term comes to an end, it'll either renew the tenancy and perhaps do another fixed term tenancy, or it will continue as a statutory periodic rolling tenancy, which you can then bring to an end by a Section 21 notice. But you'll lose that right, and actually it will just always continue unless you have a ground to bring it to an end, such as rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, selling the property, moving back in. So you'll have to have a reason to terminate that tenancy. The simple fact that it's come to the end of its fixed term, and therefore you serve your Section 21, that is expected to go.
And so that tenancy is not finite in any way, really,
No.
Other than for the causes.
Yeah. Yeah, which causes, there's other knock-on impacts as well. So, for example, guarantors. Who's going to want to guarantee a tenancy agreement that's continue for life? There's lots of, and that's the thing. It's about thinking everything through and considering all of the implications, which is incredibly difficult to do, to get right for everybody.
Come on, Mr. Lender, what do you think about all that?
No, I think what picked up from Carly really is that nuance of drafting and how it's implemented. Is there's always going to be people that fall foul of it. There's always going to be situations that hadn't been thought through. And I think what frustrates me is that if you were in a business and you made the wrong decision, you would change, right? You would change course. Whereas it seems to be once something's into law, even if it's incorrect or it later becomes something that is inhibiting growth or other things to work correctly, we won't roll back. Like we were right then, so we're right now. I just find that a bit frustrating. That is the.
I think
the
you
way
need to go
things.
and join the HS2 debate.
Yeah,
with that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean that's incredible. There was advice at the start, right, to start in the north because that's where the biggest gains were.
Yeah.
Yet they've really messed that up, haven't they?
Well, I suppose it's just the Westminster bubble, isn't it? It's much more important here in London. You sort of fall off the end of the world if you go past the M25. I think.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's it. I'm just interested. I mean, so your collection of lenders, I mean, is all this making them a little bit nervous?
I think there is always a nervousness when things change, and there's always an adaptation period. So, as Carly said, there's a sort of transition period both sides. I think for lenders, certainly the ability to evict tenants is important. When you've got somebody not paying the mortgage, right? They need to realise their security. So if there's more protections, then there's a bigger risk premium for the lender. So therefore the mortgage gets more expensive, and therefore, so ultimately everything that happens, the people that own the properties end up paying more money.
Yeah. I mean, Carly, I'm just thinking that through in itself. I mean, you're almost getting in a position where you'd have to inform your prospective tenant that the property is subject to mortgage, and therefore may make them vulnerable in certain circumstances if that mortgage defaults. I mean, I don't know where the limit is on all this.
You have clauses in tenancy agreements at the moment, don't you, to inform them that you have a mortgage.
But it needs to be very specific, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break and we'll continue our debate on the logistics of the property market at this time. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm joined by Ian Humphries and Carly Jermyn. We're discussing the new legislation that has been proposed, affecting mainly the buy-to-let market, but actually has a reach across the whole market in terms of financing and the perception of the market to those perhaps investing from overseas. Anyway, I'll put a formal question for discussion. Has the proposed introduction of new letting regulations and their subsequent watering down and in some cases postponement or negation caused unnecessary disturbance in the market and its ability to fund new activities? Well, we desperately need housing. I think, Ian, I'm going to come to you first to carry on pretty well where we left off before the break. Is this disturbing borrowers wanting to borrow and lenders wanting to lend?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you do have a number of landlords out there that have a small portfolio, perhaps only single unit, which they let. And for them, it's not really that attractive to have this continual flip-flopping of policy. Certainly the EPC changes that were due to come in 2025 now seem to be being postponed or just indefinitely cancelled. But there would have been a lot of people that would have seen that on the horizon and would have been planning. Either they would have taken action now, perhaps in between tenancies, or planning to do so in the future. There's a lot of capital expenditure that needs to be invested in the portfolio to do that. So they perhaps decided, well, actually, do you know what? This isn't worth the hassle. I'm going to move away. I'm going to sell. But they perhaps come into the market at suboptimal time. So they're being forced to sell at a time where perhaps they're not going to realise the true, or what they thought was the true value of the property. So that has consequences as well. So I do think, there's with all of these things, when you think about it as on its own, it doesn't seem like that big a problem or change. But when you think about it across society, it has huge implications and a lot of knock-on effects. Again, as Carly said earlier on, is that these consequences are not always thought about because there's always unintended consequences, and it's impossible for us to model and certainly the people that draft these laws to think about them all. So yes, there is definitely people, I'm sure, that have exited, and I know of friends that have exited the market because of this legislative agenda.
Well, I think just for the benefit of our viewers, I would just say that this EPC regulation was going to come in a couple of years' time, which would force landlords to meet certain standards of energy efficiency, insulation and the like. And of course, what this has done is put pressure on a number of landlords to plan how to fund that expenditure on the property. And in some cases, and one particular I know very well, has had to sell his portfolio because actually his properties would not have been suitable to have been brought up to the specification the government was asking for. So it's quite a damaging situation. Have you experienced this directly, Carly?
Yeah, and I've talked many times about the fact that we are seeing landlords exit. I think the reality is quite often those properties being sold are being bought by other landlords. Generally, where the legislation's got so complex over the years, and it really has. I mean, if I look back my career, I used to do general commercial litigation, and residential landlord and tenant law was something pretty easy. couple of easy cases, I'd run those. It was straightforward. It's now incredibly complex. So, lawyers have become more specialised. And actually for landlords, in what is a, very professional sector, highly regulated, you can see that for some, that, having one or two properties, or if you're going to, move abroad for 6 months to a year, the risk of renting out your property, is it something you want to dabble in? Whereas I do think we'll see a growth in more portfolio landlords who have got the resource to invest in getting their heads around the legislation and making sure their portfolio is entirely compliant. It's very different to your odd accidental landlord who sees it as a way to make some additional income. I think people are more looking at, yes, income, but sort of capital growth over time and bigger portfolios.
What's the answer? Maybe buy yourself a little shop or something and rent that out. Would it be easier?
Possibly, yeah. Or holiday lets. That's why that's quite attractive.
Yeah, it's been an explosion.
That's outside of this new.
Yeah, it's outside of it. So actually, a lot of people, and that's going to cause other. We're talking about unintended consequences. If you're somebody who's going to be, moving away for a certain period of time to try out a new town or something like that, is it not safer to do holiday lets than it is to let somebody have a tenancy, because you need to be able to move back in, and we quite often see, unfortunately, and there was a big one in the press not too long ago where landlords or owners would let out their property as a holiday let, but that actually, it may have looked like a holiday let, but it very quickly turned into a shorter or tenancy. So because of the nature of the relationship and how long they were staying. So you've got to be incredibly careful. And I think you may see a lot of landlords trying to get around it that way, which will cause other problems.
Are you sort of suggesting that the Airbnb sort of business plan might expand greatly?
Potentially. But then also, you could see the other knock-on effect is, at the moment, the legislation is proposed as such that a tenant can give notice whenever they feel like it. So we're hoping that they don't allow that for the first 6 months, but at the moment they can do it on day one as they move in. So, and like I say, we've got to go through several stages for this to become law. So we don't know what it will look like until it gets there. But holiday lets are more expensive. Why would you enter into a holiday let if actually you could enter into a periodic tenancy and go, I'm only going to be here for a month and I'll give notice. So, I'll give notice as soon as I walk in. And then that's 1 month. We've had a lovely cottage down in Cornwall and haven't paid those, higher Airbnb and, holiday cottage prices. So it could go the other way. So we shall see.
There's been some changes in Welsh legislation, hasn't there, around holiday lets, that now you have to pay business rates rather than council tax when it's unoccupied. And there's I can't remember the exact number of days, but essentially they've increased the number of days it needs to be let for, otherwise you fall foul of the rules. So I think that was in direct to try and counter the issues they were seeing around affordability for local residents. Obviously the rental and the sales prices of these units was just so high, and I think Wales as well as other parts of the country, Norfolk, etc., have obviously struggled with second home syndrome, where locals just can't afford to not only get on the property ladder, but can't even afford to rent where they live. And so you've got people that are essential for the community, like miles out of the town, and can't operate in that area.
I suppose local authorities are going to have to give a lot of thought to planning on this, aren't they, Carly?
Which has been a huge topic of discussion.
I mean, I know here, Tower Hamlets, they brought in a really draconian sort of fine structure for people who did lets under 3 months when we had the Olympics down here in 2012.
Right, yeah.
And it stuck. It still applies. Some local authorities are just blasé about it and don't mind, but there needs to be consistency there too if the whole market's going to change to a degree.
Yeah, and that goes back to the point of, you can't look at the private rental sector in isolation. You have to look at the impact on social housing. You have to look at the impact on the short-term holiday let market as well. They all have to be considered together in this very complex, multifaceted property sector.
Yes, always unintended consequences.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right, well, on that note, I'm going to ask you both just to spend probably 1 minute each with your view of what the market holds for the next 12 months in terms of rental and development. So, Carly.
uncertainty. Is that a good enough
Right,
answer?
okay.
I think that's where we are. We've certainly got change. The private rented sector is certainly driving towards more professionalism and more stability. Whether you look at a Conservative government or a Labour government, we're definitely heading towards more professionalism and stability. What that actually looks like in the finer detail, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, agree with all of that. And I think on the sales side, I think you actually see sales prices continue to drop for the next 6 months. But I certainly think you'll start to see them increase again towards the end of 24 and into 25, because the fundamentals of the market still exist. We have a chronic shortage. Planning permissions and planning approvals are dropping by double digits every single year. And there will be a drop in interest rates at some point, whether that's beginning or end of next year. But real wages are going up, right? Wages have gone up 7% in the last 12 months on average. So affordability is there as soon as interest rates start to drop again. So I think that combination of increased wages, reduced borrowing costs, and that 2 million or whatever number you want to put it in terms of houses we're short of in the UK, and net migration of 600,000 or whatever it was this year, you're going to start to see that pressure on house prices moving up again.
Mm. And will that steer the market away from the rental market again? You think it'll?
I think as Carly said, like certainly the government policy seems to be to make it more professional. I think we were talking about before the show, Lloyds have designs on being the biggest private, Lloyds Bank that is, designs to be the biggest private landlord in the UK. So that we're definitely moving in that direction. And I think it becomes more like a hotel then, doesn't it? Sure. That, you know, people, and especially we're talking about these shorter term nature tenancies where you can give notice within a month. You know, it's more transient living to adapt to, in a way, how society is becoming.
Yeah, and it's, you know, the argument is that they're pushing for more stability for tenants, and actually we may see more higher turnover.
Yeah. Another unintended consequence.
I'm going to say thank you both very much indeed for your debate and conversation. Very helpful. So, Carly Jermyn, CEO and Solicitor at Woodstock Legal Services, residential landlord and tenant law specialist. Thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you. And Ian Humphries, CEO of Brickflow, the digital marketplace for commercial real estate finance. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for your answers.
Thanks, Stephen.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Thank you for watching. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.